Tribal Greymon. You'll always see me do at least one Tribal Greymon video every set, mainly because War Greymon is my favorite Digimon. While yes, War Greymon does exist in yellow and black as well, red is the only color that has multiple printings. What's your favorite Digimon or tribal theme? Let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll give my take on a deck for the present format. And as always, if you enjoy these deck profile videos, do consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. Like usual, I'll be doing the card by card, the strengths, the weaknesses, the combos, and the side deck. This deck runs 5 level 2s, 14 level 3s, 11 level 4s, 8 level 5s, 5 level 6s, 3 level 7s, 4 option cards, and 5 Tamers. For level 2s, this deck runs 4 copies of BT5 Koromon and 1 Demi-Meramon. BT5 Koromon provides an inheritable effect that nets you a card when your Digimon with Greymon in its name attacks. In the next adventure format, security can be typically stacked with Tamer cards, and as a result, you'll likely get multiple attacks off with your Greymon Digimon. Demi-Meramon, on the other hand, is your generic plus 1000 DP buff when swinging into the security. While an effective buff, you don't get any buffs if you choose to attack any your opponent's Digimon. Because this deck only runs 5 Tamers and nothing more, Gapurimon's effect won't necessarily consistently trigger. And outside the eggs mentioned so far, no other egg provides a consistent DP buff without having to climb to a level 6 with all the Digivolution cards intact, a Piercer, or DP reduction effects. If anything, if you're more of an aggro player, you might consider swapping the ratios to 1 Koromon and 4 Demi-Meramon. But let me tell you, drawing cards helps with this deck. For level 3s, this deck runs 14 Agumons in the form of 2 BT1 Agumon, 4 BT5 Agumon, 4 P009 Agumon, and 4 Starter Deck 7 Agumon. In my previous build, I ran almost an identical lineup, but favored DP boost with Agumon over the BT1 Tamer Searcher. But the BT1 Searcher offers a lot for the fact that Marcus Damon is a huge MVP, and if you never find him, things go south really quick. By finding your Marcus Damon, you're basically utilizing 4 memory each turn, with the fact that your memory gain from Marcus can't be prevented when a Greymon attacks. But more on that when we get to Tamers. The rest of your Agumon lineup consists of BT5 Agumon, a searcher for Greymons, and Omnimons, which is the primary finisher of the deck. P009 Agumon, which provides a plus 2000 DP buff when you're attacking an opponent's Digimon or player, as long as the Digimon above it has Greymon in its name. Psst, spoiler. The entire deck is basically Greymon, except Omnimon. And Starter Deck 7 Agumon for the plus 2000 DP buff when specifically attacking a player. While you could splash the 2-cost Agumons, this lineup maximizes searchability and DP buffs. While Starter Deck 1 Agumon is another possibility, as I mentioned before, in testing, finding Marcus is your top priority. For level 4s, this deck runs 11 in the form of 3 BT5 Greymon, 2 P010 Greymon, 4 Starter Deck 1 Greymon, and 2 Geo Greymon. BT5 Greymon is in this deck for 2 reasons. Number 1, you're able to get an evolution cost of 1, potentially pending your opponent doesn't have any memory reducing blockers like Gaussmon, Sayakomon, and Cutemon. And 2, BT5 Greymon provides a plus 2000 DP buff to your Digimon when its name contains Greymon or Omnimon. P010 Greymon is the new addition to this variant of the deck, for the fact that security in today's format can be easy pickings. In combination with Demi-Meramon and P009 Agumon, this Greymon can swing for 2 checks with a DP of 8000 DP. Keep in mind, most decks are running hybrids, which typically top out at 7k DP for the popular level 5 blue, yellow, and purple hybrids, and losing only to 8k DP level 5 hybrids in red and green. Knowing your matchup here is key to attack or buff more. While these 2 are very powerful options, your best level 4 is Starter Deck 1 Greymon for its inheritable plus 1 security check, which gets deadlier as your Digimon gets into higher evolutions. And finally, 2 copies of Geo Greymon. While this could be run at 4 copies, I felt 2 was a better sweet spot for the fact that in the security, if your opponent swings into it and reveals Geo Greymon, their Bokomon, Neemon, and other hybrid searchers are vulnerable to deletion. In addition, it's another body for swinging with next turn. That being said, Cordramon is another viable option for this deck, but let's face it, blockers in general don't do much in the present format, especially if your strategy is committed to aggro. Another potential option for this deck was BT7 Burning Greymon for that hybrid evolution and swinging for game, or also evoing on top of a Tamer and deleting your opponent's Bokomon, Neemon, or hybrid searchers. Moving to level 5s, this deck runs 8 in the form of 4 Metal Greymon Alterous mode, 2 BT7 Metal Greymon, and 2 EX1 Metal Greymon. This is where the lineup has changed the most, with the fact that blockers aren't really a thing right now for most decks. Starter deck 1 Metal Greymon has been dropped, and the inheritable Piercer Metal Greymon has been reduced to just 2 copies. Instead, Metal Greymon Alterous mode gives you the perfect opportunity to hit Hybrid Searchers, Bokomons, and Nemons. And the best part? Another plus 2000 DP for the Digimon above it, if it's a Digimon with Greymon or Omnimon in its name. With BT7 Metal Greymon, once per turn when you delete an opponent's Digimon, gain 1 memory. Meaning that Metal Greymon Alterous mode is free. In addition, with this format with some opponents being very generous and handing you 3 or 4 memory, hard playing Metal Greymon from BT7 is an option that can at least be rewarding. Opponent goes into a TK or Davis their opening play? Slap down your Metal Greymon and play Marcus for free. And while Metal Greymon Alterous mode is one way to delete Digimon with DP of 4000 or less, Metal Greymon from EX1 does the same thing when attacking. There's a lot of substitutions here that you could add, depending on your style of play. BT1 Metal Greymon is another option for that added plus 3000 DP bonus. But let's be real, assuming you Digivolve from one of your DP buff Agumons and a Metal Greymon Alterous mode, your DP becomes 15,000 when going into the security with War Greymon. Speaking of which, for level 6s, this deck runs 5 in the form of 4 BT1 War Greymon and 1 BT5 War Greymon. BT1 War Greymon is a beast in this deck, giving you a +1 security check for the turn it's Digivolved into. It also has the benefit of having a built-in option card negation. While there aren't a lot of option cards in the present format that delete Digimon, yellow is the only color that uses target-specific deletion in the form of Wyvern's Breath, which War Greymon says no to. BT5 War Greymon was ultimately the other level 6 I chose over the Blitz War Greymon for one reason. Its inheritable effect that targets Digimon with 3000 DP or less. By blitzing with Omnimon, you may pass them 3 memory, but you'll hit a Digimon before passing over, especially if it's Bokomon, Nemon, or a Hybrid Searcher. I strongly recommend BT1 War Greymon to be the primary Mega level Digimon for the build. But for the other level 6 slot, there's several Greymons to pick from. Z Greymon is a potential option for attacking one Digimon, then going into Omnimon to take out a second target. For Blitz Greymon and Victory Greymon, they both have issues for the fact that both target specific Digimon. But for Blitz Greymon, I'd rather not give my opponent use of their Tamers again to Digivolve into. Can you imagine Digivolving a Jet Sylphimon and your opponent just goes into another one the next turn? Counterproductive! For level 7s, this deck runs 3 copies of BT5 Omnimon. In general, this deck tries to chip away 2 security before finishing up with BT1 War Greymon with multiple checks, then going into Omnimon for the lethal strike. Only suggested changes here are adding a copy of Omnimon X Antibody if you want the potential defense. After all, only one color really does anything with removal, and that's yellow with Wyvern's Breath. Other popular colors like blue have the capability to strip your evolution sources to prevent your Omnimon from negating attacks, but have no destruction effects to remove. And purple? No one runs Hell's Gate, Trump Sword can only work if Omnimon X Antibody is unsuspended, and Fly Bullet does nothing. For option cards, this deck runs 4 in the form of 2 Red Memory Boost and 2 Lightning Joust. Red Memory Boost has replaced what used to be Nokia for several reasons. While Nokia can play Agumons for free, memory reducer blockers have been much more prevalent in the present meta. With many players pushing their hybrids up and going into a level 4 hybrid, and following up to a level 5 hybrid for a reduced memory cost of 1, Nokia was a worse option. Sure, you might get to play an Agumon for free, but Red Memory Boost accomplishes what the BT5 Agumon can do in some respects, to adding a red Digimon. Lightning Joust, on the other hand, adds potential security checks to your Digimon. In some instances, you may just Digivolve into War Greymon in the raise, and pass turn if you have a few of these in hand. Because next turn you can Lightning Joust to pump and swing with pretty much a disregard to anything. Not even a Wyvern's Breath would nuke BT5 War Greymon if he's buffed severely. There are some substitutions for this section, but a majority of them are migrated to the side deck to maximize aggression of this build. And finally, 5 Tamers in the form of 2 Tai Kamiya and 3 Marcus Daemon. Tai Kamiya adds extra security if your red Digimon has 4 or more Digivolution components. Its inherent +1 security makes your War Greymon a beast, and against builds that use BT4 Kari Kamiya, you don't need to spend the memory for Lightning Joust. Marcus Daemon is the go-to tamer for the build because you can memory fix at 3, and suspend to gain 1 more memory when your Digimon with Greymon in its name attacks. But guess what? Memory blockers? Can't stop it. Memory reducers? Don't touch it! But Nokia? Nokia was a problem that needed to go from the main deck. While there are other Tamers that could go in this slot, I'll go over why they're in the side deck rather than the main. For strengths and weaknesses, this deck plays similar in style to Jessamon. But while Jessamon splashes Sistermons which can cause occasional bricking, Tribal Greymon offers consistency through and through. Agumons have the capability of finding your Greymon Digimon and Omnimon, and you have an arsenal of options to Digivolve or hard play into. Playtesting against Blue, this deck rips into security and denies your opponent of option cards like Howling Memory Boost. Even if you end your board with an Omnimon with 4 or 5 Digivolution sources, your opponent's Sora and Cho won't proc, and they'll need to commit multiple resources to make that Omnimon sourceless. For weaknesses, while you can delete your opponent's smaller Digimon with your Greymon effects, there's no removal in the main deck that gets rid of wide boards and or big threats. Once your opponent hits their top end, you're either going to have to beat over it or out aggro your opponent. The side deck handles some of these issues, but overall there are just some cards you can't account for. Like most red deck's biggest problems, BT4 Kari Kamiya is very difficult to deal with once your opponent has multiple copies set up. Be prepared for a game of attrition. Because BT4 Kari Kamiya is so popular, this deck has 3 cards in the main deck to prepare for this card. Number 1, Marcus Damon's memory gaining ability when a Greymon attacks. Number 2, tie Kamiya for providing the inherent +1 security check without having to expend memory for Lightning Joust. And number 3, Red Memory Boost delayed effect for the extra memory pump. These are 3 ways to ensure the memory stays on your turn, so that Blitz Omnimon can end the game. As for combos, this deck relies on preferably 1 or 2 chips with your level 3 Digimon. While doing this, you're building your finisher in the safety of the rays, 1 turn at a time. Agumon, Greymon, Metal Greymon. Oh, your opponent revealed Marcus and a red memory boost? Perfect. They play Bokomon? Even more perfect. Push. Digivolve in Alterous mode. Trigger. Delete Bokomon. Trigger. Gain 1 memory for deleting a Digimon. Digivolve into War Greymon? Pop memory boost. Play Lightning Joust. 4 checks at 17,000 DP and negate all option cards. Then Digivolve into Omnimon. Unsuspend, and Blitz for game. As previously mentioned in my other videos, BT7 offers more memory to you than previous formats. Unless you're playing against green, you'll typically get 2 or 3 memory early on. Against some of the best meta decks, yellow and blue. They'll more than likely slap down their Davis or TK early on to maintain hand advantage and early memory fixing. Which is where the side deck comes in and creates chaos for some of these decks. The side deck runs the following items. 4 Gaussmon for blocking memory reduction effects of your opponent. Sometimes this can get out of hand, and having 4 helps with finding it sooner than later. After all, there are only 2 cards in the deck that rely on Agumon to be in the Digivolution components for added benefits. Next, 2 Omnimon X Antibody. This is more so against wider building boards for attack negation and setting up for a deletion once a turn. It's not likely it'll get added, but it can also be beneficial. For wider building boards as well, 2 Atomic Blasters for cancelling out multiple bodies up to 8,000 DP. And last but not least, 2 copies of Takumi Aiba. Rookies are not something to scoff at, considering the Church of Cherubimon is on the rise. This Tamer doubles as a draw engine for you when digivolving, allowing you to dig 1 card deeper each time. But when playing against Cherubimon decks, this nullifies their ability to attack with their rookies freely after sacrificing Cherubimon off with an option card. This concludes an in-depth discussion of my take on Tribal Greymon in the BT7 format. Do you disagree or agree with some of my picks? Let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you next time. This is Digi-Panda, logging out.